I wonder if you recognize yourself tonight, these circumstances. What about tonight is predictable and what could never have been foreseen? I see you in my mind's eye. I see who's sitting where because I know where you traditionally sit in the sanctuary. And I know whom I see when I look there, and I know this moment in the service, and I know how much I take from you in giving a sermon. I don't come up here with a script to read. I come up here to have a conversation with you, and now all I have is the cold lens of a camera, a little red light that says, watch out, you're being recorded. What was predictable? What could you have foreseen? What might have happened in your life or in this world to necessitate you and I not being in a sanctuary together tonight? It's really incredible. I can't think of anything that would have said not only that you and I, but all of us, that none of us would be gathered in a single point, geographical point that we could mark on a Google map tonight. We know what it is to walk through the doors and to come in and find our seats and see each other and greet each other, and yet we don't have that ability in the same way tonight, but we have a different ability, and I hope that just like all the other realities of this year in the last 4 months, that you're finding what we've come to know as silver linings in the course of these services, that you're finding beauty in these holy days that's different, maybe even greater, maybe heightened because of a different kind of awareness, a certain electricity that goes through us when things are different, when the chair that we sit on is missing just the portion of one leg and we're teetering just slightly and having to think about comfort and discomfort, which are so potent and important in these holy days and in life. If should has any value, then I should be looking out at you, but instead, it's that lovely, friendly camera. But what I hope and what I imagine, what I move through the camera, is the idea of you, a community, and certain faces that I see now in my mind's eye, and the conversation I want to have with you. We're all mourning. We're all grieving. We're all essentially mourners at this point. Now, you might think, well, this is going to be a morbid sermon, but stay with me. We're mourning plans, we're mourning entitlements, we're mourning expectations, we're mourning vacations, we're mourning the ability to hug our grandchildren maybe for the first time since January. I've spoken to you, I've spoken to people who have said, I haven't seen my kids or my grandchildren since January. Isn't that mourning? Isn't that loss? Isn't that legitimate reason for grief? Isn't that a reason to bang our chest, to cry, to rail, to scream at anyone who will listen to us? To say this isn't fair, even though fair might not matter in this moment in our world's history or ever in life. But somehow all of us come to this moment and realize that we're humbled, that we're brought to our knees, that we don't have control, maybe in a world in which, a life in which we thought we had a lot of control. Maybe control really mattered. It was our way of grasping things that were constantly shaking and moving, which is the nature of life. We have that myth of stability. And these things happen in our lives like coronavirus and illness and any of the other things that you are going through to remind us that all of that is a myth. That stability actually isn't when we are at our best. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So I think that the best of us, those who will fare this the best, most successfully, will be guided by our Jewish wisdom, and I'll tell you why. We have a way to handle this moment. We are in a period of Shiva. The whole world is in a period of Shiva. What happens in Shiva after realizing a loss? We hunker down, we stop, we sit, we stay still. We look to others to come to us, to feed us, to nurture us. We pray. We traditionally sit on low stools, low chairs, closer to the earth, more grounded, more humbled. That stillness has value. That stillness is something that you and I have been in a process of experiencing for months already. So many people say, when can I move? When can I get out? When can I not be still? When will this period of Shiva be over? There's something beautiful that happens at the end of Shiva. The tradition is that other people, our family, our friends who aren't mourners, have to come to us in those low chairs, and they have to give us their hands, and they have to lift us up from the chairs, even if you and I might readily hop up, jump up from our chair. Maybe that isn't a physical challenge, but it is a spiritual challenge, and we need one another for that. So think about the importance and the beauty of that. that there are and will come times in which you and I will rely on you and me to lift one another up, to say this period must end. You have to move forward. You have to go forward in your life, and you can't do it alone, so here are my hands. Do you remember that story I told a number of times? It's such a sweet story about a father and a son who were on a hike, a walk. We might be able to imagine that, we who live here in Southern California with all these beautiful places to walk and hike. And the little boy sees a boulder, a rock, and he looks at it with a serious face, and he says to his father, "Do you think if I use all my strength, Daddy, I'll be able to move that boulder?" And the father looks at his son, and he looks at the rock, and he says, "Yeah, if you use all your strength, you'll be able to move that boulder." So the boy leans in, he puts all his strength into it, and you can hear him huffing and puffing as he's pushing and pushing, but nothing happens, and the boulder doesn't move. Trial and effort, and the boulder is still, and the boy is more and more exhausted and flustered, exasperated, and aggravated. And he looks to his father, who apparently lied to him. He said, "You didn't tell me the truth, Daddy. You said that if I used all my strength, which I did, I'd be able to move the rock." And the father looks at his little son, and he says, "But you didn't use all your strength. You didn't ask me to help you." That's one of the notions here. We can't do this alone. We can't live life well alone. We need each other. You're going to find now and in your life in the future that other people and the strength of your tradition and the wisdom of your people and the wisdom and tradition that God gave us is what will carry you through those moments when you flail, when the rock doesn't move, when the door doesn't open, to your greatest chapters of life. I have a friend who a number of years ago, more than a decade ago, told me that she was planning to have a major change in her life. She was going to have a child, even though she wasn't married or in a relationship. And we talked about it and talked about her decision. And something she said struck me then and strikes me now in relation to what we're dealing with: expectation and loss and plans and loss and humility. And what she said was, you know, you write a story, the fairy tale of your life. And you see yourself at certain points in your life, in certain circumstances, doing certain things, surrounded by certain people. And she said, it comes a certain point in your life when you realize that story isn't panning out. I need to tear those pages out because they are fiction. Reality is what I have to write. I have to be the author of the next chapter. And she said, so I'm not at this point in my life, this particular age that she was then, behind the picket fence with the husband and the children, maybe the dog or the cat. So what she decided to do was to have that child and to write her story. And I can tell you now, looking at her and that boy who's a man now, his bar mitzvah was a number of years ago, that she made a choice that brought beauty and joy and so much love into her life and into her world. And my story really isn't about her, it's about us. As much as I love her and care for her and her son, it's about us realizing that sometimes we have to look at our plans, our notions of what would be, our entitlements about the future, and say, who's writing this story? Am I in a partnership? Is this co-authorship? Or do I believe that I have the gall, the temerity to believe that I am writing every chapter and every word and every event that will happen on my own? Hasn't life taught us that isn't the case? Hasn't life taught us that we have personal responsibility to put our pen to the paper, to the scroll, and to write what we can and to look up occasionally and say, God, are you with me in this? Or do I have hubris in thinking that I know the future? Here's what I hope and here's what I plan. We have to have those plans for the future. And then we have to have the openness to see that the future that will become the present might be different. That we have to struggle with our challenges of loss. Because loss is always a challenge. Look to a little child who loses something that he or she cares about. Think about the screaming, the crying. All of us grow up with losses. All of us grow up with the little things and the big things that are lost to us. And sometimes that's just the future that we intended. Sometimes that's the future that we thought we were entitled to. And God willing, the future will be even brighter and even better. But we have to have this moment of realizing loss before we move forward. We're in that period of Shiva. And Shiva is about stillness. It's not yet about moving forward. It will be, but right now it's about loss. And it's about doing what we do well when we lose something that we love or someone which we love, which is to externalize it, to talk about it, which is healthy. And it's to internalize it, to embrace it, to fold it into our reality of our being. To say, yes, this is what I have, and this is what my life is at this moment. The business that was, the job that was, the future that was mine, the family relationships that were as they were, had to change, and now they've changed. And hopefully, as we've seen in some of the greatest moments in human stories, the greatest moments came after the frustration. I was reading Elon Musk talking about what he's just done, sending people to space, and the cars and the vehicles that he's driving, and all he's doing in so many areas of ingenuity, innovation. And what he said was, if you're not failing enough, you're not going to be successful. We've heard that in different ways, and I'm paraphrasing him. He said, if you're not coming up against failure, you're not going to do well. And all of us are coming up against loss, which feels like a kind of failure. And all of us are coming up against a wall that says, I can't go further. And yet what reality is asking is, there's a door, you just have to find it, or you have to create it. And behind that door and through that door, you're going to find a future that you never even realized was possible for you. Remember that Mark Twain story? The story of a man who spends years and years in a prison cell only to discover that the door to his cell was never locked. That might be you. That might be us. We need to try the handles and try new things. We need to not say no and not say I can't, but will ourselves to say I can and I might, and with you and your support, I will. That's what the future demands. Adonai ro'i lo echsar bino deshi yarbitzeni al mei menuchot yenachaleni. You might understand and recognize the translation, the traditional King James version of that 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. That prayer says you're not in this alone. Now, for some of you, that's a given because you live this kind of spirituality every day. You know that you don't go into the world every single day alone. You look up and you look around and you say, we go forward toward our goals and toward one another. But for some of us, those words are a challenge. We say those words when we mourn at the graveside of a loved one in the cemetery, in the mortuary. And we've done that together. We know what that moment feels like. We'll do it again, inevitably, and we know what those moments will feel like. We can anticipate it. But we also say that prayer at the bedside of a loved one, someone who is ailing. We also say that prayer on Shabbat. So it isn't only about mourning. It isn't only about facing death and mortality. It's also about facing the reality that we can't go it alone. We need the assurance of a psalm written by King David 2,100 years ago that says that I am as human as you will be in your generations, and I know now that I can't do this alone. So I look to God to be a shepherd as David was a shepherd. He understood that idiom, that idea. The shepherd cares for and counts every single sheep. He knows every single day if one was lost to the flock, that the shepherd's the one who guides us and walks with us on the journey. There's another part of that psalm that I take a liberty of changing, as I will in Yom Kippur, as I consistently do. And it's just a word, and I'll tell you, the word is, yea, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death. It was Rabbi Harold Kushner who taught me the distinction, taught me actually to look at that word in and to rethink it, which I do. The Hebrew allows for two translations of one word, in. Yea, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death. But begates al mavet means in, or it means through. Gay, the shadow, or I should say gates al mavet, is death's shadow, almost like a cloud that follows us through life at these points. And you and I are always actually mortal and always being followed by clouds that remind us, no matter how bright the sky is, realize the urgency of living. Because that cloud is also in the sky, because death is a part of living. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. In means that I am stationary. In means that I am stagnant. But through means that I have the imperative to move forward. I have to move my feet. I can't stay here. Shiva will end. And the challenge to you and to me is, what will we do when Shiva ends? Will we stay holed up and afraid? Will we stay on the low stools because nobody is there to lift us up? Or because, maybe in greater reality, we'll say to those people, no, I want to stay right where I am. I'm comfortable in this dark place. I want to stay in this valley. Yet our tradition, our religion, our wisdom tradition says you have a sacred obligation to reach out for those hands, to offer those hands, and to rise up, and then to do something very Jewish, to wander, to walk. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It's not that I'll be conveyed, it's that I'll have to put one foot in front of the other. I'm going to have to walk if I want this future to be brighter than the present or even the past. I'm going to have to move forward. We're wandering Jews. In fact, you think about the value of the idea of wandering and walking in Judaism. The whole essence of Torah, all of Jewish law, isn't called law, it's called halacha, which means the walking. So what does that say about being in this world and moving in this world and encountering in this world? And there's another beautiful reference that I think of now, the idea of derech eretz, the way of being a good person in the world, being a mensch. In Hebrew, it's called derech eretz, which means the path of the land, the way of the land, connecting with that ground and walking on it, moving. That's our imperative. That's what we're going to have to do when the world comes out of Shiva at the appropriate time and safely. We're going to have to journey back, and we're going to have to journey back not only together but toward one another. That's what this hub is. That's what VOS is. It's a hub for finding each other. It's a lost and found for souls. It's a way for you and me to realize I can't and I shouldn't go it alone. I have to connect with people and be inspired by their stories. I just spoke with a woman who suffered an extraordinary loss. And she still just doesn't know how to piece her life together. And one thing I know about her from talking to her mother is that she's alone, that she goes to work and she goes home and she suffers. She and her husband suffer and suffer and suffer that loss. And one of the things I talked to her about is the imperative of finding a community so that you can not only share loss and have conversation, externalize the loss, take it out into the world, into words which are such conveyors of our souls and our heart state, but also so that you can be inspired by other people because there's somebody else who suffered loss who's going to show you what it is to walk again. Because there's somebody else who's going to bring joy and a smile to your face even when you thought you didn't deserve it anymore. Because there's somebody else who's going to show you a way of living that will remind you of the way you lived and the way you're not choosing to live. Because there's somebody else who's going to read a word of a prayer or a sermon, the rabbi, the chaplain, a person, a member of the community. You're going to sing together. You're going to be uplifted together and realize that you're more than you were. I don't say these words as fiction. I say these words because my lifetime and my years of leadership have taught me the value of them, to realize the value of this tradition and this wisdom and the value of these words. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, which means I will not take a permanent residence there. I must move forward from my losses. Shiva, the idea that I must honor my losses. I must hold down, and if it means cry and beat my chest, then I need to cry and beat my chest. And then I must do that sacred act where we find God between the eyes and lips, faces of people. When we talk, when we comfort each other, when we strengthen each other, when we uplift each other, when we literally and figuratively offer our hands and say, arise, I'll be here for you. Let's walk together. You need me for the first few steps. One of the traditions that you may or may not know by the end of Shiva is that in some communities, people rise out of Shiva, so they come out of that lowly stool, they rise up, they're lifted up, and then they make a walk around their block, around their neighborhood. And that block, as you can see, has symbolism and has really true value. It's seeing the world again. It's seeing the trees. It's seeing other people's homes. It's reconnecting with the tangibles of being in the world, of needing each other. It's showing ourselves through a physical act what we're going to do spiritually for the rest of the day, the rest of the year, this new year, and the rest of our lives. I want to leave you with a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. And what he said was, when we come to these challenging moments, these changes imposed on us in life, there are essentially three stages. And the first is called Hachna'ah. And Hachna'ah might be very valuable. It's acceptance. Instead of resistance, instead of denial, which I think causes greater suffering. I think the Baal Shem Tov realized that sometimes we have to just stop and accept what is and not rail against it. And the second stage is Havdalah. And Havdalah, you know, from la 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 la, the end of Shabbat, the end of Yom Kippur. Making distinction between the sacred time and the seemingly ordinary time. But Havdalah in this case means making distinctions, which we need to do between what matters and what doesn't matter. Which are the losses that we really should be mourning, and which are the ones that we should smile on and realize possibly were a blessing and will continue to be a blessing. What matters in our lives, which people matter in our lives. Whom do we need to be there for in strength, and who will be there to strengthen us? Havdalah. And the last one you'll like, it's called Hamtaka. Comes from the word sweetness. It means to sweeten. So psychologists would say that means reframing. They would say that the Baal Shem Tov 200 years ago or so already understood the value of reframing reality. Saying the picture is the same, but switch the frame and see it differently. You get to use your eyes to see reality, but to see it differently, because we don't only see with our eyes. Our eyes are what take in the evidence in front of us, but it's our brain that interprets it. And our brain is so powerful. Our mind is so powerful. Your brain and mind are so powerful that you can accept what is. You have that power. That you can make distinction between what is and what isn't, and what matters, what doesn't matter. And ultimately to reframe reality and see the good in it and see the light in it wherever possible. So I want to leave you with a blessing. May God bless you. May God bless every single one of you. May God bring you comfort and strength, the strength to know that you matter to other people, the comfort to know that you matter to other people, the strength that it will take to support one another as you move forward. May God give you good health, every one of you. May God give you the assurance that you don't go on this journey alone. May God give you the vision to find each other. May God give you renewal. May God give you in this new year the realization that you recreate yourself, that that's your potential. May God give you light that will pour into your home for the time being, and eventually into the world, that will make it more just and more beautiful and more godly and more holy. May God give you peace, peace in your heart, peace in your community and in your home and in your family, and peace ultimately in this world that so desperately needs us to partner God to create peace. L'Shana Tova.